Hello, my name is Michael Beard. I am the author of Pack, Wanderer of Ada Eve, which is just now available on Amazon.com. Jacob Lenhoff was kind enough to ask me to do this interview for you. He sent me a bunch of questions that I'm happy to go through and try to answer, so I will be using my glasses as I refer to his questions as we go through this. So, welcome to my office, which is still being arranged and put together. Everything here is pretty new. My wife and I just moved, and so here we are. So, to begin with, Jacob would like me to tell you about when or how I became an author. That's a difficult question to answer, actually, because I can remember when I was very young being very interested in storytelling. I was captivated by TV, like a lot of young people were of my generation. So TV and movies, and as I began to read and become interested in stories, and it just became a part of me. I can remember being very young and writing by hand on pieces of paper a story. I had just seen a movie, I think it was, and I thought I can do that. And I sat down and started writing, and realized after 2 or 3 pages that writing is hard work, takes a while, and but I was still kind of hooked on the whole idea of storytelling, and so since that point, through my whole life, whenever I had an opportunity, I would like to sit down and try to write some things. And writing, like most other things, is a skill that needs to be developed. There are some storytellers who are very naturally gifted at being able to sit down and write a great book, and I envy that. But if any of you are wanting to become writers, the best way to do it is to start writing. And so all of my life I have been writing and trying to hone my skills, and just tell a good story. So that was my beginning was very early on, and it hasn't stopped yet. Did you write any stories in school that you were proud of? No. My school assignments were enjoyable. I did like writing, and I always did. But like a typical student, writing a report, just that kind of took the joy out of it, having to do something of somebody else's design. But I still took opportunities to write stories as kind of a hobby on the side. And I can remember in high school taking in several pages that I had typed out the previous night and handing them to a friend of mine in classes, and he would just be sitting there reading and giggling the whole time. So those were the kinds of writing projects that I really enjoyed, and it just gave me encouragement to keep going with writing and trying to tell stories, whether they're fun or serious or whatever. So that was my school experience. Why did I decide to write fantasy? A lot of that has to do with how I grew up. My father was in the Air Force, and we lived in Europe for several years, about 11 years altogether during my growing up time. I was even born in England. We were in England twice. The second time there, I remember a lot about England, and I just remember going to English countryside, little towns and villages, and the typical European looking narrow streets and old houses and stores and streets and things like that. I found that fascinating and wonderful to be a part of. We also lived in Germany and Spain, and we took opportunities to travel all over Europe. And whenever we did that, we traveled through mountains and valleys, and I remember being on a river tour and things like that. And there were old castles, some of them just ruins, but a very frequent part of my growing up experience had to do with being in old European towns and villages. And so when I discovered the fantasy world of in writing, which was Tolkien, the Lord of the Rings, the Hobbit, and the Lord of the Rings, I was fascinated with the story, but also the world that he constructed I could identify with right away, because I had lived for years in situations that I could see in the pages of Tolkien's work. And so it was very easy for me to fall in love with that type of story. And then being an imaginative little kid, seeing people with abilities such as wizards and sorcerers and elves and the strength of dwarves and things like that, I just fell in love with it quite a bit very early on. And Tolkien became, to me, the benchmark of what fantasy was really all about. And then I got into the worlds of C.S. Lewis and George MacDonald, and becoming familiar with those authors and the worlds that they created showed that there is a limitless possibility for looking at life through the fantasy lens and exploring all kinds of ideas and themes and just trying to tell a good story. I know that there are a lot of authors who have a particular argument that they want to make, and they address it in a fantasy book and have it out there in the world, and that's fine. It's a good way to tell a story. But there's the other side of things where you just want to tell a story and have it entertaining, and give it a sense of reality as much as you can, and just enjoy the characters and the world that they inhabit. So that was a fascinating thing for me to become involved with and to try to create as an author. Next question. Is there a type of genre that I have not written yet that I would like to? Not really. I enjoy fantasy so much that I typically stay there. A good mystery I find fascinating and entertaining, but I'm not a mystery writer. I have read all kinds of other genres. I have actually written a textbook in the nonfiction world. My background is foreign language, ancient languages, Greek and Hebrew, and also the science of linguistics. And so I've had the opportunity to teach in those fields, and I've written a textbook having to do with Greek and Hebrew. But as far as storytelling and a genre of fiction, fantasy has always been at the heart of what I want to do. And so that's where I stay and spend most of my time. My favorite fantasy novel and fantasy movie. Well, I mentioned Tolkien, and he always has been and always will be my favorite fantasy novel, both The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And in case you didn't know, The Lord of the Rings is not a trilogy, truly. There are actually 6 books in The Lord of the Rings that were written in the old style of Book 1, Book 2, Book 3, 4, 5, and 6. That's how Tolkien put it together. The publishers divided it into 3 volumes, and that's why it is usually referred to as a trilogy. So when I refer to The Lord of the Rings, I'm talking about a book that not only has sections within chapters and chapters one after the other, but those chapters are divided into books 1 through 6. So that is my favorite fantasy novel. As far as a fantasy movie, my favorite movie in this genre is Lady Hawk. It's an old movie, I think from the 80s. Rutger Hauer Michelle Pfeiffer, Matthew Broderick. Oh, what a great story. It's a simple story, love and power struggles, good and evil, and but the characters are just wonderful. Rutger Hauer plays Etienne Navarre, and Matthew Broderick um, plays Philippe the Mouse, and Michelle Pfeiffer Isabeau. And there are just some great lines in the whole movie. It's just a great adventure. And one of the next questions is, if I could play the character in any fantasy movie, which would it be? Well, it would be a toss-up between Rutger Hauer's Etienne Navarre and Matthew Broderick's Philippe the Mouse. Those two are so great in their roles, and the movie is well worth it. So if you're not familiar with Lady Hawk, I would suggest you try to find it and just enjoy it. A Lady Hawk with an E at the end. Next question. What is the longest it took you to dream up a character? Characters to me kind of flow naturally from the whole idea of a story. When I have the idea of a story, I don't want to just create a world that has certain things in it and about it. To me, it's all about the characters. So I've never had a difficult time with creating the characters and developing them. They just kind of come to life in the pages as the story develops. That doesn't mean that it's always easy. The hardest thing that I do find is keeping the characters consistent. And if you have a novel length story to tell, you need to be consistent. Your characters need to be themselves throughout the whole story. And so what I do is I take notes on the side, and not so much about the appearance of a character. I want readers to imagine the characters in their own heads as they're reading. But sometimes there might be a physical attribute that you want to bring attention to because it's a part of who the character is. But their personality, their little quirks, their background, and things like that, you need to be consistent. Characters tend to move in and out of a story. And so as they do that, your readers need to understand and trust you that you are working with the characters in a way that is worthy of the story. So it doesn't take a long time to develop a character for me. Even when I introduce a new character, it's somebody that I have thought of for a while as I'm writing. And so when it's time for them to come into the scene, I already have a pretty good idea of who they are and what they're going to do.